Right. Okay. Today we're going to cover the chapter on power and politics. And the reason why we're talking about power is that often with leadership comes the power to influence others. And it's useful to know where power comes from and how you can increase the power, and possibly how sometimes power can be abused. And how power can be abused is often talked about in the politics section. So here is referring not to government politics, but organizational politics, politics at the workplace. So coming back to what is the definition of power? Well, power is the capacity that A has, A is person A, the capacity that A has to influence the behavior of B so that B acts in accordance with A's wishes. So I think you can triple underline the word influence. And that power is about influencing others. And one ingredient of power, one important ingredient of power is dependency. And that's B's relationship to A when A possesses something that B requires. So B is dependent on A for something. It can be for money, it can be for a promotion, it can be for some whatever thing that B wants, that A has. So that's the definition of power. Now, I think you can delete this slide because this slide is rather confusing. Contrasting leadership and power. Just delete the slide. Now, more important is this slide. This is where, where does power come from? Where does power come from? And why do we want to know where power comes from? Well, if we know where power comes from, then we can increase the power coming from that source so that we become more powerful. And there is the people who developed these they call it five bases or sources of power that is developed by the authors called by the name of French and Raven. They came up with the original 5 bases of power, and it's very easy to memorize the list of 5 by remembering the word CLER, C-L-E-R-R. C for coercive, legitimate, expert, reward, and referent. Okay. These are the 5 bases of power, and you remember the word CLER, C-L-E-R-R, then you can easily remember the 5 sources of power. Now these slides, they show 7, but really the other 2 are just finer distinctions of some of them. So let's go through the slide. Let's start first with the coercive power. Okay. Coercive power. So coercive power, coercive, the English word means force, forcing other people. So it's a power based dependent on fear. How can you force somebody to do something? If that person is afraid of you, then they will do it. For example, if you use a gun, use a knife, show your muscles, threaten them with something unpleasant, either physically or psychologically. Coercive power, power based dependent on fear. For example, if you don't do this job, you're fired. Works. Or I will, you're fired, or I'll suspend you. Now the other one is reward power. Reward power is compliance achieved based on ability to distribute rewards that others view as valuable. For example, you can say, to the worker, you do a good job, I will give you an increment a good increment, or I'll give you a bonus, or I'll give you a paid holiday somewhere. Anything, but it has to be a reward that others view as valuable. So if the person says, I'll give you a reward, I'll give you a holiday to, say, a certain place, and that person hates that place, so it's not really working, it doesn't really motivate that person to work. It has to be a reward that other person sees as valuable. Now, okay, so perhaps before going on to the rest, coercive power is more negative, whereas reward power is positive. Now, there's always advantage and disadvantage of using each of the sources of power. So what's the advantage of using coercive power? The advantage, first of all. Yeah, it's
more obedient.
Yeah, more obedient, yeah. It works, it gets people to do the job, right? It doesn't cost any money, right? I mean, it's free in the short run, right? Yeah.
It saves time also.
Saves time, yeah. You say do it now and they will just do it, So saves time, saves money, makes people obedient. But that's of course in the short run, right? What happens if you use coercive power over the long run? What's the disadvantage there? Turnover. Yeah, people will finally get fed up and dissatisfied, and then they will leave the organization. Yeah?
It will not work.
Well, yeah, after a while they might just resist.
Maybe at the opposite way.
Exactly. You might have a riot, somebody fighting back, reporting you to the higher boss. They are, what do you call it, fighting back. What do you call it?
Revenge.
Yeah, revenge. Yeah, they take revenge. So it's not good in the long run. It's good in the short run, but not good in the long run. Shouldn't be overused, I believe.
Reduce the quality, I think.
Yeah?
The
quality might reduce as well. They'll do it, but the quality will not be there. Now, what about the reward power? What's the advantage of that? It's actually a mirror image, to give you a clue. They're actually opposites of each other. So we just said that in the long run, coercive power is not good because people get resentful, might leave the company. So that's the advantage of reward power. In the long run, people are more loyal. They were not angry or dissatisfied. But what's the disadvantage now? I just said about the advantage of reward power. So what's the possible disadvantage of reward power? Each time you have to cost money. Yeah, cost money. Reward power costs money. Coercive power doesn't cost any money, but reward power you have to pay. And each time you have to pay.
Yeah, they will get used to it.
And then you have to increase it and increase it and increase it. And that's the problem. And they might not do it unless you pay. And that's what happens with reward power. Yeah.
Yeah. For example, the bonus in the past 2 years, most of the bonus for the companies or 3 years more. To Dubai and UAE. So you find people less motivated. Alright, they're out of Islamic, they're moving, they start to escape even sometimes turnover or something.
Yeah, because of the reward, because they come to sort of expect it. Like every year they expect a reward, even though they have not performed well. Yeah, that's the problem with rewards. So the way to solve that problem is probably to use a balance between the two. You've heard of the word, the phrase carrot and stick, the carrot and stick approach. So this is the carrot, reward is the carrot, and stick is the coercive power. So you need to balance between the two. And you can see a lot of comparisons with animal training. So sorry to make that analogy, but there's often a similarity in terms of the effect of people's behavior. We just use coercive power only, then animals will not really do what you want them to do, but you have to mix it with reward power. Okay. So for animals, it'd be like giving them the food. So for humans, it'd be giving them the money. It can also be some kind of recognition, like like the Employee of the Year award, or just an email, notifying the whole organization about this person's achievement, So that's how you can make use of reward power. Now the next one is legitimate power, and this signifies the manager behind the desk. And then this is the person below him and the person below him. So legitimate power is a power a person receives as a result of his or her position in the formal hierarchy of the organization. If you look at the organization chart, who is the top boss, who is the below him, he or her, and so on. So what that means is that, as long as, say, a certain person is my boss, I have to follow whatever that person tells me. But of course, once a person is no longer my boss, then I don't have to listen to that person based on this. Okay. Now, the next one is expert power. Now, information power is just treated the same. Okay? So you just remember expert power, information power really is the same thing. Expert power influence based on special skills or knowledge. So, for example, in science or in any field, if a person knows what most other people do not know, then that person who knows that thing has power over other people who do not know and who need that information from him or her. Expert power, that you can say that exists in, well, without sounding immodest, it exists in the professors, it exists in the scientists, it exists in what? Factories.
Technical people.
Technical people, yeah. The mechanics, only that person knows how to repair the machine or the aeroplane. Yeah. And so that's expert power. So the expert power, what is important is that the person has power because of the knowledge that's within that person. And that person can be a low-ranking employee in the organization, but that person, if he has that knowledge, or he or she has that knowledge, then that person will actually become more important than a person ranked higher in the organization. So sometimes, the boss's secretary, even though the position of secretary is relatively low compared to, say for example, if you're working in a legal firm, right? There are lawyers, there are partners, and then there's a secretary to the head partner. So that secretary, even though she's a secretary, because she has special knowledge about what the number one likes or doesn't like, or certain information, then the secretary has tremendous power, even though she's a secretary.
Also, sir, in the hospital, like the doctor and the nurse. The nurse has information, she gets it from the doctor. So she has more information than the employee working in the office or in the reception.
The reception, yeah. But I mean, if you're comparing the doctor and the nurse, usually doctor has more expert power than the nurse. But I mean, you're comparing the nurse with a CEO, in an organization, and at the moment somebody has collapse of a heart attack, the nurse will be more valuable than the CEO.
Could we say HR as well?
It depends on, whoever has that special knowledge. When I was working in a legal firm, there was one chief clerk. He was a clerk, which is like a secretary level, but he was like more than 50 years old, and he knows a lot of things, and he was very, he had expert power basically. He had a lot of power over even the lawyers. And the last one is a referent power. Charismatic power is the same thing. You can actually cross out charismatic power, a referent power. Why do we call it referent? It's like somebody refers to that guy as a model. So influence based on possession by an individual of desirable resources or personal traits. Often charismatic leaders, leaders who, when they've got a certain style, maybe the body language and the way that they talk, whenever they talk, people are hypnotized. Then that's what we call referent power. Now, not just speakers, political leaders, and people who are good in talking. Sometimes in sports, people who are good in the sports, they have referent power. Let me give you an example. Many years ago, about 30 years ago, my brother was a tennis. My brother was a tennis fanatic. Okay? So he doesn't know which racket to buy. So he watches Wimbledon and sees who's the #1 player in the world. At that time was John McEnroe. And John McEnroe will be using a Dunlop racket. At that time was a wooden racket. Okay? It's how old it is. And my brother would buy exactly that same racket as the #1, hoping to play at least half as good as the #1. And whenever that player will change the racket, my brother will also buy a new racket. So that's why sports companies, they not only give free rackets, but they pay millions for the top tennis players to use their rackets. Why? Because Wimbledon is watched by millions of people all over the world. And people will watch what is the #1 player in the world using, and people will buy those rackets. So that's why referent power, sports personalities also have a lot of referent power over other people. Yeah.
They also use them in the advertisement. They use some people who are famous to advertise something.
Everything. So it's not even sports, even perfume.
Yeah.
Like David Beckham and perfume. I would model him on football, but why perfume? But still, that's the amount of power they have, over the public. And remember the late Michael Jackson? Yeah. During his prime, he wore a glove on only one hand, and children walking around with gloves on only one hand as well. It's a fashion statement. Movie stars, they have a lot of referent power as well. Okay, so that's where the power comes from, and the reason, like I said, why you need to know where power comes from, so that you should utilize as many of the sources of power as possible. Not just rely on one, but you should try to rely on all 5. So use a bit of coercive power, use a bit of reward power, use legitimate power when you have that power. Make sure you have expert power. That's why, part of the reason why you're all here, isn't it? To not only get the degree, but to get the knowledge. And this is probably the hardest one to get. Often people are born with it. To some degree, you can be trained to improve that, but this is probably the hardest one to improve on. But certainly, the expert power, it can be improved upon. And like I said, that's why you're all here. And legitimate power, as you rise up in the organization, the more power you have. And the reward power, be in a position that you're able to influence the rewards of others. And coercive power as well, be in a position where you are able to punish other people if they don't do what you tell them to do. If you have that power, then they will do what you want them to do. If you don't have that power, then they will just laugh in your face and walk the other way. Okay? So that's why we need to know the different kinds of power, learn to use as many sources, kinds of power as possible, and also learn how to increase each of the sources of power.
Doctor?
Right, yeah.
What you call base power and the other one personal power?
What you mentioned earlier, dependency, the key to power. So like I said, one of the important ingredients of power is dependency. If another person is dependent on me for something, then I already have power over that person. And the greater the dependency, the greater my power over that person. And what creates dependency? Three important things, and I put them in blue. You really need to remember them because they'll be important in your life. What creates dependency? Importance, scarcity, and non-substitutability of the resource. Importance, how important is the resource? Scarcity is, it's rare, hard to find. The harder it is to find, the more dependent that person is on you. If you have, like, for example, the only, for example, there is somebody has, okay, I'll give you an example later on. Now, last one is non-substitutability of the resource. That means it cannot be replaced. It cannot be substituted. It cannot be substituted. Cannot be replaced by something else. So let me give an explanation about why is it that brain surgeons, they are able to quote a very high fee for performing surgery or even for performing diagnosis. First of all, often, to do brain injuries or brain-related issues, challenges, they are important, right? It's usually life or death situations, right? And then scarcity. Are there that many brain surgeons around the world? Very few, right? I mean, there are, but compared to, say, lawyers or ordinary doctors, they're very few. And lastly, can it be substituted? Like, for example, a person has a brain tumor and then goes to the doctor, the brain surgeon, and the brain surgeon says, "Oh, for your surgery, $500,000." And the patient says, $500,000? That's too much, Never mind, I just go to my local butcher to cut up. Or I perform DIY surgery, Is that possible? It's not possible, right? So it can't really be replaced. So how can you make use of this to increase your power, to make the organization more dependent on you? Now obviously, no person is fully indispensable. Everyone can be replaced within an organization. But how to make yourself more valuable compared to before? Well, first of all, what you know or what your skill has to be important to the organization. So you have to think about, like, what skill do I have or what knowledge do I have that is, first of all, important to the organization? And is my knowledge or my skill, is it rare or is it commonplace? And can my skills be easily replaced by somebody else, either locally or from abroad? Or can my skills even be replaced by a machine? Because now, things are automated and all that, so people are sometimes losing their jobs to machines, So is your job so easy to be replaced? So you have to watch for all three and make sure, think of a way in which you become, your organization becomes more valuable. When you become more valuable to the organization. Okay? So, for example, I can relate my. Now, this is the power tactics. Power tactics are ways in which individuals translate power bases into specific actions. Basically, tactics means like your short-term strategies. That's what tactics are. What are the examples that can use power? Use reasoning. So for example, if your boss wants you to do something and you don't want to do it, you can use reason with your boss. Okay? And sometimes if you want the person to do something, then you can be friendly with that person. Friendliness always helps. Especially when you want favors from somebody else, friendliness is a very powerful tool. And coalition is forming groups. Remember, as a group, we have more power compared to individuals. Bargaining is a means of getting other people to do what you want them to do. Assertiveness is like making a stand, insisting on something. Assertiveness, well, reason can work upwards to your boss, but assertiveness in our society, you can't really be assertive towards our superiors. Our career wouldn't last very long if we do that in our society. But we can be assertive downwards. And higher authority is like, for example, if your boss doesn't want to give you what you want, then you go to the higher boss. Some people like to do that. And sanctions usually by countries, like for example, US sanction on Iran. That means they don't buy any products from that country. So that's a way of using power. So all these are the ways in which you can use power. Sanctions. Like for example, sanctions like restrictions placed by one country on another.
Like there is one country that talked about the prophet who did like a cartoon. And they did that sensation about all the products.
Yeah, they did not stop importing products from Denmark. Yeah.
So, sir,
Yeah. You see the word assertiveness? Assertiveness is, this is the ranking of the most popular method. So assertiveness is often used when you are influencing downwards, but rarely used when you're trying to influence your bosses. As I mentioned, you don't have to memorize the list. Just be aware assertiveness is in different places. But reason seems to be the most popular technique, even whether you're influencing upwards or even if you're influencing downwards. Even if you're talking to your subordinates, because subordinates now they're more educated, they have a more need for respect. So you would motivate a subordinate using reason and logic rather than just using power. If reason and logic fails, then of course you can use power, right? Assertiveness. But you start off first of all with reason, and then even with our children, like with our children, we reason first, and if reasoning doesn't work, then we become like traditional parents, but it's for their own good. Because see, with reasoning, after a while, they will, they can understand the logic behind the request, and then after a while, they will learn to do the correct behaviors, even though you don't have to supervise them all the time.
Sir?
Yeah.
So assertiveness, like if it's less people below, then it is more.
Yeah. I mean, when you're, this is a ranking, right? Like this is most popular, least popular here. Okay? So when you're influencing upwards, you shouldn't, least assertive. But when you're influencing downwards, like you can be assertive already. Yeah. Like for example, like in a shopping mall, you don't have time to reason, so you just be quiet. Yeah, so that's what you need to know about the assertiveness and the reason. That's it. The rest you don't need to know. Coalitions. Well, we no need for me to cover on coalitions. We talked about in groups. Generally, groups have more power to bargain for something compared to individuals. Just delete this slide on sexual harassment. Okay, so we finished on power now, and we are on the next section of politics.
Back to coalition, what's about coalition?
Behavior. These activities that are not required as part of one's formal role, but that influence or attempt to influence the distribution of advantages and disadvantages within the organization. Okay, so it is like abusing your power to get more for yourself compared to others. And it is influence or attempt to influence. Even if you don't succeed, but if you're attempting to influence, that's still already a political behavior. And the distribution of advantages and disadvantages within the organization. It can be distribution of rewards, it can be like advantages like time off work, anything like that. Or maybe even using a particular toilet which is much better compared to other toilets. And for purposes of discourse, you don't need to differentiate between legitimate and illegitimate political. You can strike this half of the slide out, okay? Because I think it all depends on the definition, and frankly, I cannot see the line between. Difficult for me to draw the line. But okay, we will stop. I will stop after I finish this slide. Political actions are very common at work, but sometimes this slide is saying sometimes political actions are relabeled to make it sound more proper. So, for example, if you were to create a conflict, you're creating a conflict within a company, but sometimes it can be, you're arguing, no, I'm not creating conflict, but I'm encouraging change and innovation. Somebody might accuse you of being ambitious, but you say, no, I'm career-minded. Somebody might say that you are overachieving, but you say, no, I'm just being competent and capable. And somebody might say you are arrogant, that means like very proud, but you say, no, I'm confident. There's no need